This event is a collaborative effort with Factum Foundation, and the title is Cultural Preservation in the Age of Coronavirus, Factum Foundation and the Wauja. Just to introduce myself, my name is Lucas Giles, and I'm an editor at Contra. I'll be acting as the moderator for the event today. Some brief housekeeping. The event should last about an hour, so we've allotted 45 minutes for discussion and about 15 minutes at the end for questions. If you do have questions which kind of crop up over the course of the discussion, if you're joining us from Zoom, there should be a Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. Just type in any questions you have there and we'll top them up at the end and try and get round to answering as many as possible. If you're joining us from YouTube, equally, just put your questions in the chat box, and again, we'll top them up at the end and try and answer as many as we possibly can. And apologies if we don't get round to answering everything. Hopefully the discussion will be fruitful and we'll have lots of questions. So a brief introduction to Contra for those of you who don't know us. We are an arts organisation and independent magazine focusing on the intersection between conflict and visual culture. So we produce thematic editions every year, and this year we focused on the theme of ruin. So this event is kind of partially to commemorate the launch of our first ever digital copy. We're normally a print magazine, but due to the pandemic, we had to delay going to print. So we've produced a shortened digital version with extracts from the larger print run. So in the magazine, you'll find articles, interviews with, for instance, Michael Rakovitz, who you may know's work is on the fourth, or was on the fourth plinth in Trafalgar Square. We have an article on Shahzad Dawood on his latest work, Leviathan. We also have an article about Keith Piper, and most importantly, Factum Foundation as well. So if you are interested in some of our content, the digital copy is out today, and you can find it on our website at www.contrajournal.com. Just click on the shop page and you should be able to purchase it from there. A word of warning, we are also producing the print magazine, which is coming out in November. So if you want to pre-order that as well, you can buy a copy for £12 on the website, and I'd urge you to do so if you can. So just a little bit about the premise for this event. As I said, in the magazine, we have an article about Factum Foundation and their work in the Shinju region in Brazil, reconstructing these caves from the Wauja community. Back in 2018, these caves, which have ancient petroglyphs marked into the stone, were very badly vandalized, damaged by someone of whom we don't know. And the Factum team put together an amazing project to both digitally and physically restore these caves. So we'll be hearing a little bit about that project over the course of this discussion. The second reason for this event is really to draw your attention towards a fundraising campaign that the Factum team have put together to help the Wauja community through the COVID crisis. They've been quite badly hit by the pandemic, and so the team have put together a Just Giving page. So I'd urge you all, if you're able, to donate towards that tonight. We'd be very grateful, and your contributions will go a long way. So we'll again talk about that a bit more further down the line, but just bear in mind that there's a Just Giving page. It should be up on the chat box, the links to those, if you're interested. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel. So we are delighted to be able to welcome two members of the Factum team. We have with us Ferdinand Saumarez Smith and Nathaniel Mann, and they've both worked very closely on the Kamukuwaká Caves project. Just a little bit of background about Factum. They are a digital conservation organization, the biggest in the world. They've done multiple projects, international projects, and they use kind of digital technologies, new technologies to restore, preserve, record, reconstruct cultural heritage. Most recently, they've worked on the Raphael exhibition in Rome at the Quirinale. They did a reconstruction or a facsimile of Raphael's tomb in the Pantheon. They also, at the moment, have an exhibition open at the Palazzo Fava in Bologna. It's kind of, I think, a retrospective of some of their work over the last 20 years. And it's curated by Adam Lowe, the founder of Factum. I think it's open until January 2021. So if you're ever over in Bologna or in Italy, I would highly recommend going and checking that out. I'm also delighted to be able to introduce Patricia Rodriguez. Patricia is a scholar on indigenous Amazonian peoples from the University of Notre Dame in New York and in the States. And she's very kindly agreed to act as our translator this evening. So thank you to her. She has also worked very closely with the Wauja community. So her experience and her knowledge about them will be very useful this evening. And then finally, I'm thrilled to be able to introduce Piratá, who's joining us from the Xingu region in Brazil. Just a word of warning, we've had a couple of kind of sound checks over the course of this week, and there has been some technical issues. So if Piratá is by any chance cut off, that's the reason why. We have also produced some pre-recorded video content, which we can share in the instance where Piratá might be cut off, but we're absolutely thrilled to have him here with us today. So welcome, Piratá. So, guys, I think the first thing I'd like to do is just show Piratá's very, very kindly put together a video just to introduce himself, talk a little bit about the Wauja community and where they're located in the Xingu region. And he also briefly introduces the Kamukuwaká Caves project. So if it's possible, could we play that first video?
Meu nome é Piratá, sou professor da escola indígena Leciona Vírus. O povo Wauja, em 5 aldeias, entre a aldeia Piratá, que tem muitas pessoas, uma das totalizando tem aproximadamente
Angelique, I think the video is
700 pessoas.
Can we replay the video? I think it's blocking.
Incluindo todas as populações da aldeia.
Angelique, is it possible to restart the video and see if that works?
O Wauja vive no território indígena do Xingu.
If not, I mean, we have Piratá here, so maybe we can go straight on to the...
That's a good point. We have him in the room.
The video was the backup, so...
Good point, good point. So, Patricia, maybe you could just start off by asking Piratá a little bit about the Wauja community and where they're located in the Xingu region and a bit of background and history around the community.
Primo, eles estão perguntando, tô pedindo para você falar um pouco sobre a comunidade Wauja, onde vocês vivem, né? Falar um pouco o que você estava falando no vídeo.
Sim. Então, o povo Wauja é um povo que vive no território indígena do Xingu, da abrangente da Amazônia, do estado de Mato Grosso, do Brasil, né?
So the Wauja people live in the Xingu region in southern Amazonia in Mato Grosso, Brazil.
And can you tell us about the Kamukuwaká?
Então, a terra indígena...
Pode continuar.
Can you tell us about the Kamukuwaká Caves?
Yeah. Você pode falar um pouco da Gruta do Kamukuwaká, a importância do Kamukuwaká para o povo Wauja e xinguano?
Então, a história do Kamukuwaká, a cultura, abrange todo o Alto Xingu. O povo do Alto Xingu. É uma cultura do povo Alto Xingu. Então, o Kamukuwaká é uma que dá origem à cultura, à música, todos os conhecimentos que tem na nossa vida aqui, na nossa comunidade.
So Piratá is saying that the Kamukuwaká cave is a sacred site to all the Upper Xinguan people. So the Upper Xingu is a region in Xingu where you have 16 different indigenous people speaking multiple indigenous languages, and they all agree that the Kamukuwaká is a very sacred site. So Piratá is explaining that that's because Kamukuwaká, the site and the story, is at the origins of their culture. It's at the origins of their music, of their art, of their way of living.
And can you tell us about was he there when the caves were vandalized back in 2018?
Primo, você esteve na gruta quando eles foram lá e viram que estava danificado? Você não foi, não, né?
No momento da vandalização, eu estive lá.
Sim.
Então,
yes,
foi
he
eu
was there.
Sim.
Can
Fui
you tell
eu
us
que afistei com o pessoal do Factum, quando o pessoal Ferdinand e outros demais estavam lá, aí eles ficaram muito curioso, aí eu fui mostrar para eles. E quando eu cheguei lá e vi que ficou muito estranho, que isso não era o normal.
He's telling that, yes, he was there. He was actually one of the first who identified the destruction. He was leading Ferdy onto the cave when he noticed that something was wrong.
Right. Ferdinand, maybe I can turn to you now and ask you about that experience. What was it like when you first arrived there and you found kind of these bits of stone just on the floor? What was that like as a kind of visceral experience?
Well, it was a very strange experience because we didn't really know what to expect. I mean, we'd seen a few different pictures of the cave, but, you know, rocking up at this place after a long journey and following Piratá there, weren't exactly sure what we were going to find. And then it, you know, became pretty clear pretty quickly that someone had come, what looked like in a very recent kind of attack, had gone and hacked out these engravings, and you almost felt like, you know, someone had been there just before, but it was very hard to tell, obviously, when it happened, because I think the Wauja hadn't visited the site for about 6 months before that, but it really felt like you walked in on a crime scene, you know, immediately after it had happened. So it was, yeah, it was totally shocking, but my colleague Arthur and I, we didn't really know quite what to feel about it, and we were kind of watching our colleagues from the Wauja community very closely and trying to kind of get a sense of what this meant.
And Nathan, can you tell me about kind of your involvement? So I know that you did a residency in the community. Can you tell me about that and your involvement with the Caves project?
So I first went out to the Wauja village of Piratá to work with Akari Wauja, who's the principal singer and oral historian. And it's a very long story, but we ended up making recordings of his singing and the traditional songs. And it was whilst I was out there that I kept hearing this word Kamukuwaká, you know, the first time you hear it, it's a very strange word, and my ears pricked up. And then Mafalda Ramos, who's one of our very close collaborators as well, she, who's worked for years with the community, she told me about the work that she and Patricia have been doing, and the community struggle for over 20 years with lots of different collaborators to try and protect those caves, which lie outside of the protected Xingu region. And so, because of my previous work with Factum, I was the one who put the two things together, I guess, to contacted Factum and said, look, there are these caves and they're not being protected at the moment. And they're so important in terms of the stories and the history they contain. Is there anything we can do?
Right. Patricia, maybe you could answer this, or Piratá himself. Can you tell us a little bit about the background? I mean, I know there's been some kind of disputes with the community with kind of agricultural industry in Brazil. Can you talk a little bit about that and a bit of a background in terms of the geographical context?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit, and then I'll ask Piratá to say in his own words. So the Upper Xingu is located in one of the most productive, like agriculturally productive regions of Brazil. So it's one of the main exporters of soybeans and other products. So there's really a lot of territorial pressure where they live. And this is precisely on top of the headwaters of their main river, of the Xingu River. So you have the agricultural advancement right on top of the headwaters. The Kamukuwaká cave, one of the reasons why it's so important and so sacred is because it's one of the sites that helps to regenerate life and fish. It's the main staple food for the Xinguan people. And that's because it's right at the headwaters of the river, right? So this destruction, it is not just about the heritage, it is about the ecology, about everything. It's about the entire life of the region, right? Piratá, você pode falar um pouco dessa luta de vocês, dos Wauja, faz mais de 20 anos, 30 anos já, lutando pela preservação do rio e do Kamukuwaká?
Então, o Kamukuwaká ficou fora do território indígena do Xingu, né? E naquele tempo quase ninguém falava português, talvez por isso que a luta não demarcou aquela área.
So Piratá is saying that the Kamukuwaká cave is located outside the formally demarcated indigenous territory. He's saying that he thinks that happened because back then in the 50s, no one in his people knew how to speak Portuguese. And so they weren't able to defend their territory. So it was taken away from them. They didn't have qualified people back then to deal with the politics and the bureaucracy of the white people. Piratá, pode continuar.
Então, depois disso, a gente estava vendo esse gruta, Kamukuwaká, está fora do limite e o povo resolveu lutar, não só por Kamukuwaká também, porque lá é um rio. Então, precisa lutar junto para conquistar aquela área, proteger.
So now the people realize they have to fight to protect their river and their sacred sites. And so implicit in Piratá's saying is that, so they are now preparing to fight for it. So they have young people like Piratá himself that are studying to be able to defend his people's rights.
And could you ask him a little bit about kind of their relationship with the Brazilian government and Bolsonaro? I mean, what's the political context at the moment in terms of the indigenous communities in the Xingu region?
Primo, ele está perguntando qual é a relação, como que vocês entendem o governo Bolsonaro? O que você acha que mudou, né? O que o governo Bolsonaro trouxe para a região?
Então, o governo, que todo mundo sabe, ele odeia muito os povos indígenas, né? E avançando com essa gestão dele no governo, ele está avançando muito mais o desmatamento, chegando perto do desmatamento na área indígena. E a terra fica muito apertado.
So he's saying that the deforestation, which was already very serious in the region, has increased exponentially since the Bolsonaro government. My own assessment is that people feel authorized to do it because they feel there will be no consequence to their actions because the president himself conveys that idea. So Piratá is saying that the deforestation increased exponentially and is getting very close to the indigenous settlements. And it's not just the deforestation of the borders, but there's also invasions. So people are actually going into the indigenous territory to steal precious wood and hunt and things like that. Não é, primo? As invasões, eu falei um pouco agora das invasões que estão ocorrendo e que não eram normais antigamente, né? Que agora estão acontecendo. Você quer falar sobre isso?
Uhum.
Maybe this is not.
Sim.
Sorry, Piratá, go ahead. Sorry.
Então, a invasão que aconteceu recente foi um grande choque para nós também, porque é a primeira vez que a gente viu com os próprios olhos aquela situação.
Uhum.
Mesmo assim, a gente não está ficando calando a boca e a gente está mandando vários documentos para o Ministério Público para tentar resolver isso.
So Piratá is saying that it is the first time, now just recently, that they had actual invasions in their territory. So besides the decreasing borders of the forested area, people are now going into their territory. And so he's saying that it was a shock for them to see it, but that they are not standing still. They are fighting for it, and they are writing documents to the government, all the responsible institutions to try to stop it.
Well, I think that might be a nice opportunity to kind of return to the Kamukuwaká caves, and maybe I can turn this over now to the Factum team and ask a little bit about that reconstruction process. How did it come about? What were the processes involved in actually rematerializing these caves, which had been so badly damaged?
Well, first of all, I'll talk a little bit about how we recorded them. Obviously, we'd come all that way to record them in their original state, but discovering that they were vandalized, we had the stuff with us, so we thought record it anyway. We brought two different scanning systems, one of which is called LiDAR, which is what kind of architects use to map out a space. And that was very good at kind of measuring and mapping out the rocky outcrop that the main rock art panel is found on. And then we also use photogrammetry to record the detailed parts of the carvings. So we're using these two different kind of resolutions, basically. But what was really interesting from the beginning onwards was that whilst I and my colleague were recording the surface, Akari Wauja, who Nathan spoke about earlier, who's a singer and historian, was telling the story of the myth to both the Wauja and others of the anthropologists who were there at the same time. One of which was the narrative, and one was the kind of actual substance. And I think that was really crucial in how we reconstructed the cave. So although we were all using kind of very technological processes to 3D mill the digital data to make a physical facsimile, before we got to that stage, the initial restorations that my colleague Irene Gaume made on a computer, where she was kind of going back through all of the photographs that had been taken of the cave before it had been destroyed. It was key that we then sent those initial restorations over to the Wauja community to then correct that initial restoration and kind of say, this is where that's a bit wrong. You need to make that deeper, or you're missing something here or there. And I think that was what to me was so interesting about the project, was that we were really trying to think about how the Wauja could kind of take ownership over the reconstruction of the cave itself and that process.
Nathan, maybe you could answer this. I was just going to ask a little bit about the kind of Wauja response to the reconstruction or the rematerialization of these caves. I know you had an event last year, is that right, where you sort of had a workshop in Madrid, where you kind of showed your work to some of the locals. Can you talk a little bit about that event and what the reaction was to kind of seeing these rematerialized, vandalized caves?
I can do, and I will. I also think it'd be really interesting to hear Piratá's response to that question about the community's response. But first, I do worry for the people joining us who haven't seen anything, because in the video that Piratá and Ferdi prepared, there were some images of the cave. Now, the best I can do is show you, and I'm not sure how well this will work. So this is a publication we put together which documents all of the restoration process. And I don't know if I hold it up to the camera, that if perhaps you can get a sense of some of the engravings that were there. So we're talking about a 6-meter long wall, and these engravings are nobody knows the exact age, but possibly thousands of years old, and they represent different. Well, we should ask Piratá what they represent. I mean, we've got the man himself. But maybe we should give those questions to Piratá, and then I can tell you a bit about the event in Madrid.
Piratá, eles querem que você fale um pouco sobre, primeiro, a reação da comunidade quando eles viram as imagens reconstituídas, né, na impressão, né, e viram as fotografias do 3D. Qual a reação? Você responde essa pergunta primeiro.
Sim. Então, quando aquele pessoal chegou de Madrid e eles levaram uma fotografia no centro da aldeias, e todo mundo ficou olhando e muita pergunta na cabeça. Eles querem saber a altura, para que é mais fácil levar as crianças a ficar em pé lá dentro. Eles estão com muito expectativa de ver de aquelas pinturas que existem naquela caverna já estavam lá, para mais fácil de contar para as crianças. E não só para as crianças, para todo o Alto Xingu que vai ser convidado também. Eles precisam conhecer.
Okay, so Piratá is saying that when the Wauja representatives that were at the event in Europe, when they came back to the village, everyone was very curious, looking at the photographs and asking about the cave, how big it was, if it was the real size or not. And they were very excited about the possibility of having the cave back in the village. So it would be much, much easier to teach the kids about the stories and the engravings. And also they plan to invite all other Upper Xinguan people to go into the village to visit the cave, to get to know the cave, because again, this is a sacred heritage for all the indigenous people there in the area.
So is it, just to clarify, I mean, how are they actually used when they're telling the kind of histories? How do they practically use the engravings as a way of telling stories to their community?
Yeah, Piratá, qual é o significado das gravuras e como que vocês usam essas gravuras para contar as histórias e transmitir, como os mais velhos contam as histórias para os mais novos usando as gravuras do Kamukuwaká?
Então, existe um certo tempo para usar. Então, a pintura tem um certo significado para os homens, para a mulher e para as crianças também. Então, essas pinturas também são utilizadas durante naquele ritual, principalmente da furação de orelha. Então, aquilo ali serve para utilizar aquele pintura especificado para eles. Então, e de certo momento, principalmente em outros rituais também, aquele ali sempre utilizados. E também nos artesanatos que é utilizado também. Ele, coisas que vêm do Kamukuwaká.
Okay, so Piratá is talking about, so there's a whole many dimensions to how this engravings are reproduced in Xinguano culture. So Piratá was talking about the fact that it's connected to rituals, both like day-to-day ritual uses of artifacts, for instance, also celebrations. They do in honor of spirits, for instance. They have to paint their bodies. And so there are certain engravings that certain people of a certain age, of a certain gender can use in certain times of the year. So there's a whole set of cultural rules to follow. And these rules are connected to myth and ritual. And so he was talking specifically about one main ritual that is connected to the Kamukuwaká cave and the engravings there. It's called ear puncturing ritual. That's the initiation ritual of the young leaderships. So the whole story tells about how the whole Kamukuwaká myth tells us about how these engravings were done at the cave. At the same time, the story also explains all the social and moral, all the social etiquette and moral principles that guide leaders, right? How to be a good leader in a Xinguano community. So he was saying how all of that is connected. The day-to-day is connected to myth, that is connected to moral principles and social rules. And all that is connected to the engravings and the paintings that they do to the bodies and the paintings that they do in the artifacts, in pottery and other arts and crafts they do.
Right. Nathan, maybe I can return to you now and you could just briefly talk about that event in the workshop in Madrid.
Okay, so I mean, I think I should introduce it by saying that the initial intention was not to have it in Madrid or present it in Madrid, because its current status is the reproduction of the facsimile is in Madrid and it's waiting. So if there's anybody tuning in who has it within their powers to help us move this forward, please do get in contact. The original idea was to present it as part of the Venice Biennial in a wider context with work from other indigenous artists, principally Takuma Kwikuru from the Kwikuru community, also within Xingu. But unfortunately, for various reasons, including Bolsonaro, that didn't go ahead. But by that time, Factum had already started creating the facsimile. And then with the help of People's Palace Projects, who are a research and institute based at the Queen Mary University, who have worked with Brazil and who were actually as in Factum's first contact with the Xingu region about 4 or 5 years ago. Thanks to them, we managed to get some funding to hold a conference in Madrid that also acted as an inauguration for the cave, and we were able to bring over representatives of the Wauja community, Akari, who we've mentioned a couple of times, and his son, and also Takuma Kwikuru from the Kwikuru community, to hold a roundtable discussion, a series of discussions with Paul Heritage, with Adam Lowe, the director of Factum Foundation, about what happens next, about what the and the thing about it is it was like having the whole community there, because Akari was on his phone the whole time, and everybody in the Wauja village was pitching in questions via Facebook. What's going to happen to the cave? What's happening now? What's, you know? And so we had 2 days of discussion, but also of music, and there was incredible indigenous activist and healer Shirley Cranach, and she did some healing ceremonies to also help inaugurate the cave as well. It was there are some videos online which I'd suggest people go and check out.
Oh, that's great. That's really wonderful. I think that might be a good opportunity now to turn our attentions to kind of the second rationale for this event, which is really to draw your attention towards the impact of COVID on the community in Brazil. The Factum team have put together an amazing fundraising campaign to help the community through the COVID crisis. And I would urge you all to donate if you possibly can towards that. So maybe, Patricia, I could get your help again to ask Piratá a little bit about the impact of COVID and what's been happening in the community in the Xingu region.
Primo, quais estão sendo os impactos do Covid aí nas aldeias, na sua comunidade, nas outras aldeias em torno, né, os seus vizinhos?
Então, e nesse cenário, no mundo, né, e que todo mundo acha que não ia chegar aqui no território Xingu, mas infelizmente chegou no Xingu, chegou até no povo vizinho ali, enquanto nós, o povo, o Wauja, fizeram um isolamento total. Ninguém sai, ninguém entra. E por esse momento tá ficando desse jeito. Até agora ninguém saiu para locais urbanos.
So Piratá is saying that at first they didn't believe, no one believed that COVID would get there into this region, but it arrived there. And he's saying that his neighbors were very affected. In fact, it's very serious, the situation there. But the Wauja community, they just got into a complete lockdown for over 3 months now. So there's no cases, no confirmed cases of COVID in any of the Wauja communities so far, because they are completely isolated. And that is one of the reasons of our campaign. And this is me talking now, right? Because the objective is to help the Wauja to remain isolated so that they don't have to go to the city to buy basic necessities.
So can I ask a little bit about the fundraising campaign? I mean, what will the money that's raised go towards, and what will the impact be on the community there? I don't know. I can probably open that up to the floor. Someone might be able to answer that.
I'll just jump ahead and just say that, so the fact that the Wauja were able to remain completely in a complete lockdown for over 3 months now has to do with much sacrifice and discipline from all communities, from all Wauja villages. But it also relates to the fact that we were able to send out these basic needs for the community, right? So things, and also like, so the campaign so far has been sending mostly hygiene and health items. And so and besides that, like some productive materials they need to like for farming and things like that, things that they don't produce, that they have to go to the city to get so that they can produce their own food the traditional way. Yeah.
And Patricia, maybe you could answer this. I know that previous kind of epidemics, things like measles, had a kind of very serious impact on indigenous communities in that region. Do you know a little bit about that, and whether there are parallels between previous epidemics and the possibility of something similar happening now due to COVID?
I'll just go ahead and pass the word to Piratá, because he's an indigenous anthropologist and a historian in his community, so he knows about that. So Piratá, can you talk about? Você pode falar das epidemias de antigamente? O que aconteceu na comunidade? Lembra? Sarampo.
Sim, eu acho que dentro de 1950, que aconteceu isso, segundo as até sobrevivente aqui da aldeia está lembrando disso, com esse cenário de hoje. E algumas pessoas estão contando que foi um massacre que eles fizeram. Muitos mortos, que ninguém sabia o que tipo de doença. Aí depois sobraram mais ou menos 20 pessoas. Sobraram, segundo as histórias, segundo os sobreviventes que contam. Isso aqui, no cenário de hoje, não tem diferença. Eu mesmo, segundo as pessoas.
So Piratá is saying that it was around 1950 that the last major epidemics hit the region. There were others after that, but the measles one was the biggest, more traumatic one in the last century or so. And so he tells that people till today tell the stories. So in Wauja community, the elders are survivors from that time. And what you have is many orphans. So most of the elders in Wauja community nowadays, they are orphans. So they have many stories about not just how traumatic the situation was, but also how then they had to grow up in a very difficult situation, right? So Piratá was saying that some people say that only 20 people survived in that village. What happened afterwards is that all the little communities, they were so impoverished and so many people had died that they joined together in one single village. But Piratá says that people say that only 20 people survived in his village. And we're talking about the main village for the Wauja people. So it was a big village. And also like me now I'm adding this. You had a different people, a different ethnic group, the Kutanapu, who were neighbors to the Wauja, and they were completely exterminated. So you had one family surviving, and that one family joined the Wauja because they needed to continue to live in community. So one people in the Upper Xingu were completely extinct in the measly epidemics. And also Piratá added that he thinks, and people say in his village, that there is no difference to what is happening now. The only difference is that you have different methods and means and equipment and information to deal with it, but it's the same thing. They call it in the native language the big or the hyper disease.
And then, I mean, I think this can be a final question, because I did promise that we'd have 15 minutes at the end for opening up the floor. But I was just wondering from Piratá whether he could talk. I mean, he mentioned that there haven't been so many cases directly in the Wauja community, but could he talk about other indigenous groups there and the impact there, and whether it's been kind of more prevalent in other communities?
Yeah, so he actually already talked a little bit about that, how it has been prevalent in other communities that were not able to go into lockdown at the right time. So you have many and still increasing cases just next to the Wauja. You already had more than 20 chiefs at the Xingu of deceased.
Wow.
So the loss of a chief is a pretty big deal for a community, because it might just destructure the entire decision-making processes, right? So you have a lot of that. Actually, you have the death rate much bigger than the national median in Brazil, and Brazil is already in a pretty bad situation.
Okay, well, I think maybe we can end there in terms of the formal discussion and kind of open it up to the floor. I'll just reiterate, if you have questions, I can see some already in the Q&A box, but if you have further questions, please just bung them in the Q&A box on Zoom, and also in YouTube, on YouTube, just put them in the chat box and someone will transfer them over. So the first question from Sophie, did any of the original fragments remain untouched after the vandalization?
Oh, should I translate that?
Yes, I think, I mean, Piratás, I hope we're not overburdening him, but his viewpoint is the most relevant in some ways.
Piratá, existe alguma teoria de quem destruiu a gruta? O que os Wauja acreditam que aconteceu?
Então, acreditamos que homem branco, porque mesmo que ela foi tombado pelo IFAM, que é o Instituto Artístico Nacional, e eles não entendem, e eles sempre frequentam e não respeitam. Eles frequentam cavernas, por isso que a teoria que vem no povo Wauja foi homem branco. E o Wauja, ele não pode fazer isso porque ele entende a importância.
So Piratá is saying that they believe, or they know, it was white people that did it, because white people in the region, they don't understand the power or the significance of the site. He says that they see white people going there to fish, and they throw trash and they disrespect the site. He's saying that Xinguano people would never do that because they understand how powerful the spirits, or how powerful the site is.
And can I just add something to that, which was that I remember Akari saying that these fragments, you know, the very substance of the rock had magical properties. So if a page, which is a kind of spirit healer, who had bad intentions got hold of these fragments, they would be potentially very dangerous. So it's a kind of incredibly charged site, and that exists on the actual substance of the rock.
And I mean, as a follow-up to that, someone has asked, an anonymous attendee has asked, do the Wauja community practice any carving or sculpting reminiscent of those in the caves? And again, Piratá is probably the best place to be able to answer that.
Well, I'll just go ahead and answer that, because that's a pretty straightforward answer. So they don't carve, they don't have the custom to carve, because there's actually no stone structures where they live. So the cave is a very peculiar, very special place that is a little bit further away from where they actually live. And so that is the place where they used to do it back in the days, where the Piratá's ancestors did it, right? But the Wauja they use, and Piratá already talked a little bit about that. So the Wauja reproduce those geographic figures and those designs everywhere. So they do it in their own bodies, painting themselves. They do it in the pottery and all kinds of arts and crafts.
Great. A further question, what is the purpose of the facsimile and what will happen to that now? Maybe the Factum team might be able to answer that.
Well, I mean, I think the purpose of the facsimile is really to enable the Wauja community to continue to tell the myth and the story of Kamukuwaká, which, you know, because is where. Are you okay, Nathan?
Oh, sorry, it just froze. It was like you were about to give the answer and it froze, and it was perfect.
Oh no. Okay. Well, I don't know if it's still working now, but so what's interesting about the rock art panel, right, is that they have, for example, carvings of fish spines, and Kamukuwaká himself, the kind of legendary figure, was supposed to have engraved those very markings, which produced fish, kind of magically produced fish, whilst he was in seclusion in that cave site. So I think, you know, what we've been trying to navigate through this whole project is the idea that we're trying to keep the myth alive, but the myth in some sense is dependent on the physical object. So when they destroyed the physical object, they in some sense destroyed the myth. So being able to kind of reconstruct it is really very literally keeping it alive for that community. And just to follow up on the second part of the question, I mean, we all very much agreed when we discussed in Madrid that the ultimate, you know, destination for the cave is 100% back to the Wauja in Piratá or wherever they choose. The only thing that might happen, you know, it seems less likely in this post-pandemic, well, pandemic world, is we want to kind of try and, you know, maybe tour it to different exhibition venues and, you know, spread the story, because obviously that's important in the longer term aims of trying to protect that community.
Great, thank you. We had two questions actually. I mean, Piratá has already touched on this, but maybe we can reiterate the questions. From the RA actually, a question for Piratá. Are there any theories as to why the petroglyphs were hacked off in the first place? And yes, I think that might be a good place to start. I know he's mentioned about the kind of white people, but are there further theories about who precisely they might be?
Primo, quem que vocês acham que fez essa destruição? Sim, foi branco, mas quem? E por quê? Por que que vocês acham que os brancos foram lá destruir?
Então, a gente achou por causa tem um endereço de exploração ali. Porque, claro que vimos a ferramenta, dá para ver o rastro de ferramenta que foi utilizado. Porque os homens brancos querem uma exploração daquele lugar. E de mais outros lugares também que eles precisam. Então, aquilo ali é uma fonte de riqueza para eles. A exploração. Por isso, eles querem começar a destruir aquilo ali.
So Piratá is saying that for them it's pretty obvious that it was white people that had financial, economic interests in the area. Right? So as I was saying, it's a pretty rich area for agricultural exploration. And so when you have indigenous reivindications for territory, there are many people that don't like it at all. So Piratá is saying that for them it's obvious that it is related to white people trying to grab on to Wauja traditional territory for their own economic use.
Great, thank you. Another question from an anonymous attendee. Could I ask what has happened to the destroyed pieces? Due to their significance, are they still kept in the area? I don't know if the Factum team still have the pieces.
That's a question for Patricia, I think.
Piratá, você sabe o que foi feito com os restinhos das pedras que estavam lá? Como que vocês limparam, arrumaram as pedrinhas?
Então, a gente recolhemos e procuramos algum lugar para deixar lá. Eu, como participante, e a gente resolveu recolher e a gente não levou. A gente procurou um lugarzinho lá e deixamos enterrar.
Exactly. So what Piratá is saying is that they collected all the residues and they just found a place to hide it in Kamukuwaká. So they didn't take it away to the village. They just buried it in Kamukuwaká in a place that no one else would find it.
Oh. Very interesting. I think we probably got time for one more question, and I've got one here from Anushka Morrison. Can you tell us a bit more about how the vandalism was communicated to young people in the community? And similarly, how the community learned about...
Primo, como que vocês informaram as crianças, os jovens, sobre esta destruição no Kamukuwaká? E a segunda pergunta, como que vocês explicaram para a comunidade, como que a comunidade ficou sabendo sobre Covid?
Então, a primeira pergunta é sobre a destruição, né? Então, aconteceu assim, na nossa cultura sempre se reúne bem de tardezinha, onde as pessoas se reúnem no centro da aldeia. Aí de lá que a gente contou. E ficaram muito tristes ver. E que a casa de saberes caiu.
So he's saying for the first question that they have that custom. They have a custom of getting together, especially the men. They get together at the end of every afternoon in the center of the village to just discuss things, important things for the community. So he's telling how they got into that meeting, the end of the afternoon meeting, and they told everyone what had happened, and it was very sad. And then he used this expression, everyone was very sad that the house of knowledge had been destructed. Segunda pergunta, primo. A Covid. Falar sobre educação, como que explicou para as crianças e para a comunidade sobre Covid.
Tá, beleza. Então, as informações que chegou para nós aqui é através da televisão, através da internet. Então, quando chegou aqui, e a gente fez mesmo esse procedimento que a gente fez com a notícia do Kamukuwaká. E a gente, os jovens que acessam a internet e televisão, e a gente leva no centro da aldeia lá que acontece, e lá espalha.
So he's saying that the young people that have access to internet and know how to speak Portuguese, they had this information through internet and television and all the media. And then at the end of the afternoon, they go to this meeting at the center of the village and they explain to the elders and the older people what's going on in the world. And then from there, the information spreads throughout the village.
All right, guys. Well, I think time's of the essence. I think we all need to go and eat something or go and relax. So I think we'll leave it there. I just want to say a massive thank you to all our panel. So Nathan, Ferdinand, Patricia, Piratá, you've been wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Thank you too for everyone for joining us, and also to all the people behind the scenes who've been working tirelessly to put this event together. Just to reiterate, if you're interested in the digital copy, please head over to our website, www.contrajournal.com. If you have a moment, please also donate to the Just Giving page, and you should find that on the chat box. So a final thank you to all of you for joining us. Apologies for all the technical issues that we've encountered. Zoom is a totally new platform for everyone, so I hope it's be manageable for everyone. So thank you, and hopefully see you soon. Bye-bye.